How are you? You flatter me.
Hey, we're doing amazing. Look, Guy is somebody who really, truly needs absolutely no introduction. In fact, I dare you, Google his name, and it will return over thousands of results as he truly continues to lead a remarkable life. Perhaps working closely with Steve Jobs at Apple to being their chief evangelist. I mean, he was even in the room when deciding on the groundbreaking Think Different ad campaign. Today, he is the chief evangelist of Canva, which from humble beginnings, when he started with them in 2014, to now they have over 150 million customers and over 2 billion in revenues. So I think he really does know what it takes to scale. And I have to say, Guy, back in the day and for many years, you really heavily influenced me in my learnings, and particularly your talk around art of the start, which I really recommend people do listen to after this podcast. Now, finally, Guy has recently written a new book called Think Remarkable, where through his own podcast, which I highly recommend as well, has been able to interview over 250 legendary people to truly understand what it takes to lead a remarkable life full of fulfillment and impact. So it's a real privilege that we get to spend some time with you today, Guy.
Let's do it.
Just before we started, I reminded myself of the 1997 ad. And I get the hairs on the back of my neck still, and what an iconic moment. So let's jump right in. What was it like to be in that room when that campaign was created?
Well, there's two parts to the answer. So the first part is, of course, to be one of the first people to see the television commercials for that campaign was very special, right? I mean, it was right up there with seeing the 1984 commercial if you're that old. But anyway, so yeah, it was very special, and we just loved the ads because back then in 1997, if you were using a Macintosh, you were definitely thinking different. You weren't thinking the same. So that was the real high point of that. But the story that I tell is that at the end, Lee Cloud from the ad agency says to Steve, I got 2 copies of videotape with these ads on it. I'll give one to you and one to Guy. And Steve says, don't give one to Guy. Give me both. And so I said, Steve, what's the matter? Don't you trust me? And then he said, yes, Guy, I do not trust you. And then I said, that's okay, Steve, because I don't trust you either. That cost me a couple $100 million.
I mean, so on that note, I mean, you clearly had been back and forth a few times to Apple. And on the third time, as I say, legendary has it that you decided against that opportunity. Biggest regret of your life?
No, not at all. I mean, listen, if I had stayed at Apple any of those 3 times, I would be probably worth a lot of money. I would also have a very much limited life because I would not have been an entrepreneur. I would not have been a venture capitalist. The way Apple PR controls its employees, I could not have written a book. I could not have become a podcaster. I could not have become a public speaker because, I mean, think about it. What conference have you ever been to and there's an Apple exec talking, right? They're very heavily controlled. So, yeah, I mean, it had a financial cost. But on the other hand, in terms of enriching my life, not with money, but enriching my life with experiences, there's no comparison.
Not many people would say that, in truth. Be so vivid about the trade-off between financial gain and having a full life. I'm just curious, where does that come from? Is it something that thought you've grown into or something you've always thought in the world?
I think it comes from rationalization about why I was such a dumbass and now I still have to work. How's that? Because if you make a fundamental mistake, you got to figure out a way to justify it to yourself. How's that?
I think that's a bloody good answer, quite frankly. Wow, crazy. But I'll tell you what, so Guy, I'm going to come on to your book for a second because I read it cover to cover, by the way, and I think it was a fantastic read and a read that I hope one day we aspire to write a book. Clearly will be in your shadows. But I love the beginning of your book where you said that you were dedicating it to Gen Z and saying that your time has come. And I just wanted to get your perspective as to why you felt that why the dedication was relevant and what your thought behind that was.
Well, I mean, I literally think that it is time for Gen Z to take over. That, we boomers, we did a lot of good, but we did a lot of bad. And, a lot of the situation they're inheriting now, you could say is our fault. And, the fact that, I don't know what it's like there, but I mean, you guys have Brexit, but we have Donald Trump. I would gladly trade Brexit for Donald Trump, because Brexit, you can fix with a law, right? Well, Donald Trump, I don't know how or when or if Donald Trump will be fixed. So I think, that somehow we've become a very fractured society. And literally, I think that democracy is at risk. I mean, literally on November 6th of this year, it could be the beginning of the end of democracy and for the United States, and maybe there will be no United States. I mean, it sounds kind of melodramatic to say that, but listen, stuff has happened before. I mean, if you take the extreme, I suppose that in 1928, somebody said, nah, don't worry about this guy named Hitler. Nobody's going to take him seriously. Nothing wrong is going to happen. Well, guess what? So it could happen.
Yeah, definitely more fractured society, not just UK, US. I mean, frankly, everywhere. So you make a good point. So let's go on to the subject about being remarkable. What's step one for somebody who wants to have a remarkable life and make a difference?
Well, step one is that you prioritize that instead of quote unquote trying to be remarkable, you focus on making a difference. I mean, it could be a great product, great service, could be a book, it could be play, it could be photography, it could be teaching. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be Steve Jobs or Jane Goodall to be remarkable, but you need to make a difference. And so the sequence of events is you make a difference, you make the world a better place. And then guess what? People will think that you are remarkable. So it's not, this is not a self-help book that I'm saying, all right, you read this book and, 48 hours later, you're going to be remarkable because you're going to reposition yourself. You're going to rebrand yourself. You're going to change your reputation from being a loser to being remarkable just by reading this book. That is not true. If that's the kind of book you want to read, and if that is how easy you think it's going to be, do not buy this book, because you have no idea how hard it is to be remarkable.
There was a point in the book, and I think you pitched up a fork in the road, where on the one hand there were individuals that stuck to their knitting per se, and knew what they were going to do early on, and follow that through for the rest of their career. Whilst on the other hand, you've had other people who dived and pivoted their way to becoming remarkable. And I wonder if you can elaborate for us maybe those two routes, perhaps. And what would you recommend if people were today thinking about their careers and they were early on in this journey?
Well, so this is in the growth section. There's 3 sections for the book: growth, grit, and grace. This is the growth section. And basically, the concept of growth is that you can change, you can acquire new skills. You're not stuck. You're not stuck at a high point or a low point. And I took up ice hockey at 44 and surfing at 60. So if I can do that, believe me, anybody can grow. And now one of the things that I've noticed about remarkable people is that they can keep 2 conflicting ideas in their head. And I'm telling you right now, these 2 ideas are conflicting. So if you're Jane Goodall and you fall in love with animals, at age 6, and now at age 90, she's still continuing on that same path. Well, that's growth along the same path. But the other example I cite is Julia Child, who until her mid-30s was a spy working for the precursor of the CIA. And then in her 30s, she moved to France and fell in love with French cooking, and she became the French chef. So that is something like changing horses, right? Definite. You wouldn't say, oh, the way to become a French chef is to be a spook for the CIA. I mean, that is not exactly a logical career path. And so these are 2 completely different ideas. You stick along one path or you change paths. And there have been people who have done either path. I mean, there's probably people who have done both, that they stuck on something for a long time and then switch. Or there have been people who have been switching a lot and then finally found their, true love and stuck with it. So I'm telling you, there's not one single way to make a difference. There's a lot of different ways. And if you're an entrepreneur, for example, sometimes people say, you got to just keep believing. You got to just deny the naysayers. You got to ignore the negativity and the pessimism. You just got to believe and you got to keep going. There's other people who say, get the product out there, minimum viable product, see what happens, fix it, pivot. Well, kind of two completely conflicting pieces of advice. And quite frankly, either of them can work.
Yeah, makes sense. It doesn't make sense, but it does make sense. Now I know you've got a lot of time for Robert Cialdini. Bizarrely, coincidentally, we had him on the podcast about an hour and a half ago. Had a great session with him. And of course, I think he's maybe been influential for you. So what is it about his perspectives on influence that you think has been so impactful and enduring?
Bob Cialdini is truly one of my heroes. And I read his book, Influence. And, so many things in there made sense to me. If you are in marketing or you're an entrepreneur and you have not read Influence by Bob Cialdini, you are definitely screwing up. You need to read that book. And I'm telling you, as an author, when an author tells you to read somebody else's book, there is no higher form of praise, okay? I'm telling you, go read Bob Cialdini's book because I learned so much from him about reciprocation and about the power of social acceptance and the power of all these great techniques he has. And I dare say that you read his book and you will change a lot of your marketing.
I love that. I love that thought. I want to go back to your book and the fact that, you talk about the 3 sections: growth, grit, and grace. And in fact, just last week, I was listening to your podcast with Angela Duckworth, remarkable lady. And I want to know, do you think that grit is more important than growth?
I think that grit is the flip side of growth, that, you cannot grow unless you are gritty. Because when you grow, by definition, when you grow, you are trying new things. And the probability of when you try something new that you'll immediately be great at it is very low, if not zero, or maybe even negative. So if you want to grow, if you want to take up hockey at 44, or you want to take up surfing at 60, that's the growth mindset. The growth mindset says you can try this, you can succeed, Guy. But then, and to actually do it, you got to have grit. You got to keep going out on the ice rink. You got to keep going surfing when you don't catch any waves and you fall down and you make a fool of yourself and, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm using surfing and hockey, but that can apply to anything. And so, yeah, the flip side of growth is grit. It's not different. They're both necessary.
I have to say I find surfing a nightmare because it's that frustrating. It's such a knife-edge thing. I really want to know the chain of events that got you into that room, i.e. into Apple, how it all came about. What was the sequence of events?
My story starts in Kalihi Valley in Honolulu, Hawaii. Kalihi Valley is it's a lower middle class part of Hawaii. It's kind of a tough area. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a slum, but it's it's definitely not Mar-a-Lago. Let me put it to you that way. Okay, so I'm in this public school. And this public school teacher tells my parents, take me out of the public school system, put me in a private school, college prep school, because I could go to college. I have that kind of potential. Now, luckily, my parents listen to her and they make the sacrifice so that I can do that. So I go to this private school. And for the life of me, I don't remember why I did it, but I applied to Stanford. And for the life of me, I don't know how I got in, but I got in. I mean, I'm so old that, back then, being Japanese American, there was an oppressed minority. I got in on the minority plan. That's not exactly true today. So anyway, so I go to Stanford, and I become best friends with this guy named Mike Boych. And the start of our relationship was because we both loved fast cars. Now, the difference between me and him is that he had fast cars and I wanted fast cars. But anyway, we both love fast cars. So we became very good friends, roommates. And then years later, he was at the Macintosh division and he was Apple's first Macintosh software evangelist. And he contacts me, and I didn't get the first job, but I got the second job, and I became the second software evangelist for the Macintosh division. Now, I'm telling you this story because I could tell you with openness and transparency that the only reason why I got that job is because of nepotism. It was because of that friendship, because I majored in psych at Stanford because that was the easiest major I could find. I went to law school for 2 weeks and dropped out. I got an MBA in marketing, and then I was working in the jewelry business, jewelry manufacturing. So if you looked at my background, if LinkedIn existed back then, you would look at my background and you would immediately reject me as like lacks a college education, lacks the work experience. Why is he even applying to the Macintosh division? So I got in because of my voyage. And so now I'm a evangelist at Apple, and I do well, and I've become, well known for my Macintosh evangelism. And then out of the blue, a few years later, I get this email from someone who's running the TEDx Expo of Palo Alto. And she says, Jane Goodall has accepted our invitation to speak. I would like you to interview her on stage. And she says, basically, I know we don't know each other, but I know of you because of your work at Macintosh. So that's another important lesson. It's not who you know, it's who knows of you. Okay. So now I interviewed Jane Goodall. We really hit it off. We're friends to this day. I went to her birthday party a few months ago. And so I asked her to write the foreword, and being the wonderful person that she is, she wrote the foreword. So that's a very long story about how Jane Goodall wrote the foreword, and, how I went from Kalihi Valley, lower middle class part of Hawaii, to having Jane Goodall write the foreword because of all these things that just happened to work out.
I find that fascinating. And like you say, that friendship that you fostered over fast cars. I saw a recent interview with you where you talked about the role of motivation and being motivated in your life. And I think your motivation, if we carry the analogy of fast cars forward, was to be successful, was to have a successful life in an economic way and have a very fast car.
Well, but my point is that I think a lot of times when you read people's biographies or autobiographies, they always say, yeah, I wanted to empower people. I wanted to democratize computing. I wanted to end poverty and ignorance and all that. And I am sure that there are people like that. But I'm telling you quite honestly, I didn't want to change the world. I just wanted to change the car. Okay. And I'm saying that it doesn't matter why you are motivated. It doesn't matter what motivates you. It just matters that you are motivated. And if you are motivated and you embrace the growth mindset and you embrace the grit mindset, then hallelujah. Then make a difference and be remarkable.
What motivates you now as much as whatever did before?
Well, at this point, I'm in the grace phase of my life. And just a week ago, my daughter graduated from college. My son is entering college next year. So I only have one tuition left to pay, which means that I have less financial motivation. So some of the pressure is off. But now, my thinking is, how will I be remembered? What are people going to remember me for? What is my legacy? And I want my legacy to be that I empowered people, that I empowered people with my podcasting, my writing, and my speaking, my investing, and my advising. And so that's what drives me now is, how are you going to be remembered? Did you make the world a better place?
Well, I find that really both interesting and inspiring, because what you didn't refer to was, those pivotal moments in the organizations that you worked for where you became perhaps famous in the first instance, but now it's turned 360 and it's much more, as you say, empowerment in different sort of ways. I really like that notion of how these things sort of work. Guy, I want to ask you a question, and this maybe relates a little bit back to your days and having had exposure to so many senior leaders over your time. there's an expression which is nice guys finish last. And I want to get your take on that. Is it true?
I do not believe it's true because hopefully you'll agree. I'm a nice guy and I didn't finish last. Okay. Eh, And another data point is Melanie Perkins, the CEO of Canva. She's a nice person and she ain't finishing last. Now, it may be that people look at Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and I say, here are two assholes and they finished really first. So maybe you got to be an asshole to finish first. But I don't think being an asshole is necessary nor sufficient to succeed. And we can have a deep philosophical question about, does being an asshole enable you to succeed? Or when you succeed, do people tolerate you being an asshole? Like, which came first? It's a very deep philosophical question that I hope brighter minds than mine can address. So if you're listening out there, you need to separate correlation from causation. And so, I think one of the dangers of Steve Jobs, and I would not be where I am without him. And it was an honor and a privilege to work for him. I would not replace those days. But, one of the dangers of looking at Steve's example is, so I'll go buy jeans and I'll go buy New Balance running shoes and I'll buy a black box turtleneck. I'll buy, a black Mercedes and I'll park it in the handicap spot and I'll drive in a carpool lane just by myself and, I'll rip people in public. They say, all of that's Steve Jobs. So I'm going to do all those things and I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs. Well, if you do all those things, most likely you're just going to be another asshole. You're not going to be the next Steve Jobs. So, what made Steve Jobs so great is his vision and his passion. And he was a mission-driven asshole that would on the mission of making the world's best computer. And if you stood in his way, he ran you over. I mean, such is life.
Get a bit of an insight, which perhaps we all knew, but you've made it really vivid, and I appreciate your candor on that. You mentioned Canva. So this is the exciting new project. Tell us about where you're taking Canva. Where's it going?
Well, it's not me that's taking Canva. It's 1,000 employees, but it's Melanie and Cliff and Cameron. It's not me. And I literally think that they want to democratize design to the point where basically you can design everything on Canva. And it started with graphics, but now it's presentations, it's infographics, it's resumes, it's websites, and they built in AI. And I've never seen a group of people execute as well as Canva. Never. Not Apple, not anywhere else. I've never seen people who execute as good as Canva.
I love that notion. And like you say, it's become democratized. In fact, it started out as sort of an individual endeavor, but it's gone so mainstream. It's quite incredible, actually. And I guess related to that thought about scaling up, you've sat as a VC and a private investor, and I'm sure in hundreds and hundreds of pitches. And you proclaimed once in one of your talks that actually the goal of a pitch is not to necessarily get a sale or investment or an offer and acceptance in that moment in time. And I think a lot of people see it too short term. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more about what we should be thinking about during that pitch process.
Yeah, I think that people think that the purpose of a pitch is to use an American term, shock and awe, that your pitch is so shocking and so awe-inspiring that the venture capitalists in the room, they're apoplectic, just like they're just beside themselves. All they want to know is, how do I write you a check? What's your bank number? What's your routing number? What's your ABA number? Do you take wires or do you want a cashier's check? And I'm telling you, it just never goes down like that. So because they believe that's how it should go down, they think more is more. So, I guess when you're attacking a country, you want to send in the bombers and the Marines and the Army, the Navy SEALs and the Tomahawk missiles and the, anti-aircraft and the F-16s and all that, just overwhelming massive force. That's not a pitch. A pitch is simply that you can get to the next stage. So it's not to seal the deal, it's to prevent rejection. So you prevent rejection in the pitch and you get to due diligence where they start researching, what you're saying. Then if you get past due diligence, then you get to terms. And then the point of terms is to come to terms. And so maybe a month or two later, you could actually close the deal, but it ain't going to happen in the pitch. You're not going to close the deal in the pitch. You're just going to stay alive.
Stay alive. Love it. Love it. We talked about empowerment and empowering people. I'd love to get a bit more on that in terms of you, Guy, as that empowering leader. What does that look like? What's your best as a leader?
Here are some qualities I would say define a good leader or best leader. First of all, that you have empathy, for your employees, your vendors, and especially for your customers. And even beyond empathy, it would be great if you once were the customer, or you could actually be the customer to see what it's really like. And, Steve Wozniak making an Apple I, he was building it for himself. He was the customer. So that's number one. Number two is, I hope you appreciate diversity. That, if everybody's an engineer, who's going to sell it? And if everybody's a salesperson, who's going to build it? And if everybody is a white male from Ivy League, how are you going to tap brown, yellow, and, black customers? And if you're from Ivy League and everybody else in the company is from Ivy League, how are you going to, relate to people who have not had this fortune of going to an Ivy League school? So you need diversity. And if you're a straight male, well, there's such a thing as the LGBTQ market, and, you need to appreciate them as employees and as customers. So you need diversity. So empathy and diversity, and then you need luck. And I think luck, the flip side of luck is grit. That, gritty people are lucky, and lucky people are gritty.
I think that's lovely. I think that notion, I clearly a great follow-up question would have been around the role of how do you get more lucky? Guy, in your remarkable life that you've had, there's absolutely, the fact that you've had both the highs and the lows. And I wonder if you would share maybe one or two of those low moments and how you were able to springboard back.
Okay, well, let me be open and transparent here. So I got to tell you something. I am a lucky guy. I would say I'm freaking phenomenally lucky. Now, some people would say, well, if you're a trillionaire, you're phenomenally lucky. And I'm not a trillionaire. I'm not a billionaire. But I got to say that, I am deaf. I became deaf about 3 years ago. I think it's because I listened to so many shitty bitches, but that's besides the point. So anyway, I'm deaf. So, that's kind of a pain in the ass. But, nobody ever died from deafness. And I came from a lower middle class family, but I did not come from total oppressive poverty, right? It's not like I was born into a family with zero resources. I was born in some third world country, and I, just escaped being killed, and I had to sneak across the border, and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I didn't have a rich upbringing, but I did not suffer. I was never hungry. I was never unclothed and all that, right? So listen, I don't want to be held up as a hero that look at all the stuff that Guy has overcome. That's just not true. Compared to the people I've interviewed in my book, one guy was in prison for 22 years and now he's a remarkable artist. One guy, both his parents were crack addicts and they were stealing from him, and they were living in the projects. One woman has ALS, and, she's lived 10 years with ALS. Usually you die after 2 years. So now those kind of people have overcome something. But Guy, being deaf, You get a cochlear implant, I can kind of hear. We've been having this interview. You didn't know I was deaf until I just said that, right? So, and like I said, nobody ever died from getting deaf. If the worst thing that happens to me is I'm deaf, I make that deal right now. I said, show me where to sign, God. I'll sign for that deal.
I love that. And, but I've loved this experience, your humility. You're definitely not an arsehole. Thank you for your time.
Here in the chat, I thought of something. So this is, if somebody, doesn't have the resources or doesn't like to read books, this link here goes to a Canva course that I created with Canva about how to be remarkable. And it's a free online course. It has an interview that Jane Goodall did for me from Africa. I mean, it's a very special course. So if you could tell people about that too.
Certainly will, Guy. Thank you very much.
All right.